Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Christian's Questions, a project of the New Tolerance Campaign. Today, with me, I have a great guest, Tyler O'Neil. He is the managing editor of the Daily Signal. He is an author and the author of the book Making Hate Pay, a brilliant expose into the abuses of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Tyler, how are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you, Christian?
Good, good. So before we get started, is there anything you'd like to notify our audience about? Any projects you're working on? Any big things that are in the works for you?
Well, I always have more stories I'm working on. Actually, right now, I am waiting on responses from some organizations that are connected to Jewish Voice for Peace, which is one of these anti-Israel mobilization campaigns that has been promoting these protests that verge on anti-Semitism in college campuses. And there are some very interesting ties with the union that represents employees at Jewish Voice for Peace and other unions at organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center. So I'm reaching out and seeing, hey, well, there's this tie here. Would you comment? Would you distance yourself? That kind of thing.
Wow.
But there's always more going on these days.
Absolutely. That's some good. You're doing good work. So then, speaking of the SPLC, I go into my first question. You've made a name for yourself by documenting the abuses of the SPLC. And so, within all of your study of the SPLC and what they've done, what is the most egregious example of abuse that you can recall off the top of your head?
Well, I think the worst thing that they continue to do, there's this organization called the Family Research Council, and not everybody in your audience is going to agree with the Family Research Council's positions. But I
Mhm.
think everybody can agree that an organization that stands for things like religious freedom, that advocates for, and that may have some views that are outside the mainstream, but does everything above board, make sure that it's advocating for what its supporters believe in, and it's a conservative Christian organization, that it doesn't deserve to be on a map with chapters of the Ku Klux Klan. That never has the Family Research Council advocated for violence, never have they gone after targeting people, and yet they've been put on this map, and they were targeted in 2012. There was a man
Mhm.
who later told the FBI he looked at the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate map
Mhm.
and saw the Family Research Council on there, decided to go there with a handgun and a bag of Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches to shoot everyone in the building and smear a Chick-fil-A
Mhm.
sandwich in their faces. And the SPLC has these claims against the Family Research Council that are not true. The Family Research Council has rebutted them time and time and time again. And yet, despite the falsity of their claims and the fact that their hate map inspired a literal act of terrorism against this organization, the SPLC continues to put the Family Research Council on this hate map with chapters of the Ku Klux Klan. That, I
Wow.
think, is the most egregious thing that they've done, just because it ties directly to that attack. And they've been clear. I should say the SPLC immediately condemned the terrorist attack on the Family Research Council, as well they should, but they have still kept the FRC on the map now 12 years after this terrorist attack.
Well, yeah, and us here at New Tolerance, we've actually noted this fact several times because it seems quite egregious that you would liken a group that, whether you agree with their values or not, pushes values that for a long time have been mainstream in American culture with a group that preaches hate and other fringe values like the Ku Klux Klan. So that's a very good point. So speaking of the SPLC, also going a little bit more deeper under the hood, tell us about some of the scandals that have plagued their offices over the past few years. There's been, of course,
Yeah.
reports about sexual harassment that their founder had to resign over. And then more broadly, there's been reports from some people that there is a culture, a pervasive culture of sexism and racism. One employee who spoke under the condition of being anonymous said that their black people are being passed up within the organization for white people or whatever. So can you give us some clarity on what's going on there as well?
Yeah, so these are long-standing claims that have been made at the Southern Poverty Law Center. They trace back into the 90s when reports first surfaced that Black employees were being put in the mailroom while it was white employees who did all of the public-facing work. And there's been a lot of, resentment among Black employees at the Southern Poverty Law Center that they're not being given the same opportunities. And I saw, on the website Glassdoor, I reported on some of these claims that are more recent in 2017, 2018. But then in 2019, they had this big scandal. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people know about because it was like a blip for the legacy media. They reported on it. So what happened was there were claims of racial discrimination and sexual harassment, and the co-founder of the organization, Morris Dees, the guy whose list of donors that he got from the George McGovern campaign provided the backbone of this organization. He was fired, unceremoniously pushed out. And he still claims, I mean, he told me that he was guiltless in this. So, and then what happened was they brought in Tina Chen to do an internal investigation. She was Michelle Obama's former chief of staff, and she had done some alleged cover-ups with the Time's Up campaign, where Tina Chen was essentially this fixer. She was brought in to do an internal review. The results of that internal review have never seen the light of day, nor do
Hmm.
I necessarily expect them to.
Hmm.
But then that was when the Southern Poverty Law Center decided to unionize. So there are nonprofits that have unions, which is a mind-boggling idea to me because if you work at a nonprofit, theoretically you're there to advance the cause. You're not there to make a buck. And so these unions are sucking. I mean, they made the SPLC recently had layoffs, and we know they had layoffs, and we know that it was really bad because their union went screaming to the public about it. And it's like
Hmm.
having a union it may sound like a great idea to many on the left, but I think it's a self-defeating proposition, and you can see that with the SPLC here.
Yeah.
But yeah, they haven't fully addressed these issues, and they have a Chinese lady who's leading it, Margaret Huang now. But we don't know for certain if these concerns have been fully addressed. And that's one of the reasons why the union exists is they're trying to hold their people accountable when they've been proven not to be accountable. The problem is, of course, the union is staffed with everybody who thinks that the SPLC is the best thing to happen since sliced bread.
Yeah.
So they're not really being held accountable on the main issue, which is, as the New Tolerance campaign has rightly pointed out, the way that they fail to mention any left-leaning um, hate, violence, um, difficulties we're seeing in the culture, where they're myopically focused on conservatives and they leave, Black Lives, and not to say that all Black Lives Matter is necessarily bad, but there are Black
Hmm.
Lives Matter chapters that have engaged in intimidation, violence, and Antifa and Ruth Sent Us and all the groups that New Tolerance campaign has put on their hate map, which should be on the SPLC hate map too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, and actually, speaking of that, in 2020, I found an article recently when I was doing some research. I'm sure this is probably old news to you, but in 2020, when there was talks of, there was like a big push from Republican congressmen to declare Antifa a terrorist organization, the SPLC actually wrote an article on their website saying that to declare them a terrorist organization would be dangerous and a threat to civil liberties. Mind you, this is an organization that literally occupied an entire part of a city, a major city in America, Seattle. This is an organization that has been behind the assaulting of several journalists and activists who they disagree with. This is an organization, of course, that was played a big role in the quote unquote summer of love in the mid 2020s. This is an organization that is avowedly open to violent tactics to push their political aims. So why do you think the SPLC is willing to straddle such cognitive dissonance when it comes to Antifa and or other organizations?
Yeah, well, I think it's because they side with these organizations. The SPLC is not just, they don't just act as an arbiter of hate, they also act as an ideological, group in their own right. They have the Learning for Justice campaign, which advocates for many of the things that they fault groups like Moms for Liberty for opposing. So, this is when there are, LGBT books that include graphic sexual depictions that people think don't belong in school libraries. The movement on Moms for Liberty's part isn't about trying to get these books banned from publishers. It's about removing them from school libraries so that they're
Hmm.
not automatically recommended for children.
Hmm.
Um, and so the SPLC says, oh, this is an effort at book banning. This is an effort at censorship. And it's
Hmm.
like, no, it isn't. There are two very different things here. And
Hmm.
what we're talking about is, and so the SPLC is advocating for these things. And then in the same breath, they're branding anybody who disagrees with them as hateful and putting them on this map. So when they have, when they have acts of violence that we see from Black Lives Matter rioters or we see from Antifa, they turn the other way because they realize these people are on their side on issues that they care about. And so they'll say, and I was reporting on them overlooking that violence and carrying water for Antifa for a while. I've reported on it for Daily Signal and for PJ Media. But the fact that they carry water for Antifa shows also there's a relationship there. Like
Hmm.
if they're and there's reporting on this. There's a woman who now works at the Southern Poverty Law Center who affiliated with Antifa, who decided that she would feed Antifa information on the people that Antifa should target.
Hmm.
And then Antifa went and targeted those people on her recommendation. This woman's named Megan Squire. She used to just help the Southern Poverty Law Center, and she was a conduit between the SPLC and Antifa. Now she's actually fully employed by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the
Interesting.
SPLC is not hiding. And the SPLC has a Canadian offshoot that started with a grant from the SPLC that openly associates with Antifa. So this is not some conspiracy theory that they're connected in this way.
Yeah. No, I've actually straddled the line there a little bit because I want to dig more into the left's relationship with the SPLC. You mentioned earlier that the SPLC is not a big fan of unions, and funnily enough, a lot of corporations or companies or not or groups, nonprofits that profess leftist ideas are not in favor of some one of the more the central tenets of leftist ideas, which is like labor unions and things of that sort, whether it be Starbucks or whatever. And so, how does the grassroots left view the SPLC in its current form? Do they view them sort of as this establishment entity that is inauthentic and only pushes what is acceptable within the sort of Overton window as it relates to left wing discourse? Or do they view them as a true agent for grassroots left wing causes that sometimes is just inconsistent? Or is there a different perspective they have of this?
So I want to be clear, I was not saying the SPLC is anti-union. One of the
Okay.
reasons why the SPLC has this union is because they're openly pro-union.
Okay.
And they receive money from the left's what I call the left's dark money network,
Hmm.
where you have all these organizations, particularly the Tides Foundation is big in funding the SPLC. And the Tides Foundation has a project called Palestine Legal that provides legal services for those who are arrested for their role in anti-Israel
Oh, that makes
protests
sense.
and riots. So like this is all part of a network. And I think the SPLC has a lot of street cred among those on the ground. I mean, we have to remember this may seem like ancient history, but there was a moment when a conservative thinker was going to speak at a college campus. And I mean, I think this was like the very beginning of the protests on college campuses. And
Hmm.
the reason why the students organized against him was because of what the Southern Poverty Law Center had said about his work.
Hmm.
So I think the SPLC has a lot of value on the street among the liberals. But what we see is that they also have this tension where they were unwilling to call out the anti-Israel riots because I think a lot of their allies are on that side, even though a lot of their donors are probably older school liberals who don't agree with what's going on in the name of supporting Palestine. So there's this interesting dilemma the SPLC faces, and there's a reason they didn't comment on October 7th for nearly an entire month until, after October 7th happened. And the SPLC union was not happy about this. They came out with their own statement in favor of the Palestine protests, in favor of the anti-Israel riots. And the SPLC only belatedly came out with a statement. Their original statement falsely claimed that Israel had been targeting Palestinian children for attacks. And only after I called this out did they stealth edit that statement to remove that claim. So
Wow.
this is a very interesting, I think they're in between a rock and a hard place,
Hmm.
and I want to see if they're ever going to take a stance fully one way or the other, but I doubt they will.
Very interesting. And so, speaking more about their integrity now, there's been reports that the SPLC has offshore bank accounts. What's that all about?
Yes. So the SPLC has offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And I mean, this is part of the corruption. The reason I wrote the book, I called it The Corruption of the Southern Poverty Law Center, because they rake in millions. Their endowment is upwards of $720 million. And it used to be half a billion. Now it's closer to three-quarters of a billion. And they have these offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They are raking in cash through branding, oftentimes conservatives, sometimes not even openly conservative, advocates on the other side of the aisle of them on certain issues by branding them hateful. And so the SPLC has a tremendous amount of money. We don't know where that money is going, but it's really fishy to have a nonprofit organization with bank accounts in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very interesting. And a lot of people probably don't know that. I mean, how many of their funders, people that give them money, know that they're doing such, say, shady things? Is it like a well-known secret or is it concealed?
I would think it's concealed.
Yeah.
So when you have legacy media coverage of the SPLC, it's almost always positive and it's almost always, here's this organization that can be trusted on hate, that can
Hmm.
be trusted on Confederate monuments, that can be trusted on various issues. And they almost never mention the scandals. They almost never. So I have a Google News alert for the SPLC.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of um, these obituaries that are published where people will say, in lieu of flowers, please donate to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And every time I see that, my heart sinks
Wow.
because I'm thinking about this person who, on their deathbed, they're like, I want to make a positive impact in the world. How can I do that? I'm going to tell people to give to the SPLC in my memory. And I'm just like, if you had a notion of the organization you were propping up, like you would never have done this. Like I know that those people are not sitting there thinking, "Oh yeah, I want to give to an organization that has bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and that smears people who disagree with them by putting them on a hate map that has inspired terrorism." Like I have more faith in humanity to think that the people who are doing that are thinking along those lines.
Yeah. And so, in your opinion, how can Americans who are concerned about the abuses of the SPLC push back in their own capacity? What is the best course of action?
Yeah, yeah. Well, naturally, one of the first things I'd say is to buy my book, Making Hate Pay: The Corruption of the Southern Poverty Law Center. But I also think there are a lot of mediating institutions that Americans deal with all the time. Your banks, where you invest your money. When it comes to there's a thing called donor advised funds, where these institutions are helping people give their money to nonprofits that they believe in. And many donor advised funds have decided that they will take the SPLC's hate map as gospel and say, if anybody's on this hate map, we're not going to allow you to donate money to them. And I think one of the main things we can do, everyday Americans, anybody who's investing in something like that, if check with your investment company and make sure that they know that the SPLC is not a neutral arbiter of hate. Make sure that they know, if they don't already, that the New Tolerance campaign has a hate map that exposes the sort of extremism that the SPLC is turning a blind eye to. And before you take the SPLC at its word and adopt policies, and this is throughout our economy. Like there are weird things like Eventbrite, Airbnb, like many of these new platform companies will outsource the hard work of determining who to do business with or not to the SPLC because they think of it as a neutral arbiter of hate. And you can make a difference by telling this company that you care, that there's evidence out there that this company cannot be trusted. You know, they can go to my book, they can go to New Tolerance campaign, they can see that the Southern Poverty Law Center should not be trusted. And so I would encourage people, and of course, contact your congressman. I don't know, you know, you may live in a red district, a blue district, you may be represented by anybody. I don't care who your representative is, they should know that this group is not reliable. And a lot of, unfortunately, it's Democrats who often do this, but a lot of politicians have praised the Southern Poverty Law Center in ways that they should not if these facts were more broadly known. And one of my goals is to call out the people who do that.
Yeah. So in a recent op-ed, you wrote that viewpoint diversity is being considered by some to be white supremacy.
Yeah.
So can you explain how that's justified? That seems like a very odd line of thinking to me. What's the logic behind it, to the extent that there is logic involved in that absurd statement?
Yes. So there is a bizarre type of logic to it, but it's completely off base. And this is particularly the Southern Poverty Law Center released an article where they were claiming that. So there's another group called Alliance Defending Freedom that has won multiple Supreme Court cases and that represents religious freedom cases, that does a lot in the free speech realm. And
Hmm.
they launched something called the Viewpoint Diversity Score Business Index. What this index does is it tries to call companies out when they adopt radically leftist positions and when they push woke ideology in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what they're trying to do is say, let's get back to neutral. Not everybody wants pronouns in their bio. Not everybody wants to shout their abortion. Not everybody, you shouldn't feel shamed by this company if you
Hmm.
disagree with some of these ideas. And so this organization is trying to create breathing space for dissent, much like the New Tolerance campaign does. And the SPLC came out with an article saying this is rooted in white supremacy and this is rooted
Wow.
in Christian supremacy. And it's just like, no, it is so far like you are on in an entirely separate universe. And you should be able to know that this isn't true. But the SPLC does it, and they do this kind of thing with a straight face all the time. So like it's not just that they publish the hate map that has Klan chapters and then that also has conservative groups. They say when they publish this hate map that it is showing the infrastructure of white supremacy. And this is all
Wow.
part of their push. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
so from their viewpoint, and this is how I try to square their circle because I don't think it really can be squared. It's so off base. But the way I see it is, if they buy the principles of critical race theory, of the Marxist version, not the intellectual version that can be interpreted different ways, but there's a popularized Marxist version of critical race theory that says race is the number one thing. Our society is inherently oppressive of Black people and supportive of white people. And therefore, you have to support essentially what boils down to racial quotas. And never mind that many of these racial quotas often end up hurting Asian Americans more than they hurt whites because they're ostensibly trying to prevent whites from taking advantage of the system. But if you actually look at the way the demographics work out, usually it's Asian Americans who are most hurt by these policies. But, all that aside, their ideology is set on critical race theory. And so
Mm,
if you disagree with critical race theory, if you disagree with their policy prescriptions, you are supporting the inherent racism of the system. And therefore, they can claim that it's white supremacy if you don't embrace everything that they advocate. So this is kind of the intellectual root of what they're saying. And then, of course, there's the practical. I think they've realized that just branding people racist doesn't have the strength that it used to rhetorically. So they have abetting white supremacy to kind of up the ante and make it seem like they're really offering a real critique, when in reality, they're blowing steam and they're just trying to find one more way to silence opposition.
yeah. Well, it's very, very insightful. So the SPLC has been sued numerous times. This is my last question. They've been sued numerous times. Um, and they've had to close out lawsuits and everything. Has them being sued and having to pay out money, has that changed their behavior at all? Or have they still continued to do the same thing they continue to do?
So the SPLC is really smart in the way that they respond to these lawsuits. They file these motions to dismiss, and almost always the lawsuits get dismissed because the people writing the lawsuit, it's very hard to prevail on a defamation claim. You have to prove, like, if you're considered a public figure under the law, you have to prove that the person defaming you acted with reckless disregard for the truth. And so that's a very high bar. I mean, I think that bar is too high, to be honest. And there's active discussion. At least two Supreme Court justices would have taken up a case directly involving the Southern Poverty Law Center to re-examine that standard. But they agreed that under that standard, a lot of the lawsuits against the SPLC don't stand up. There is one, however, filed by a man named D.A. King in Georgia, whose organization, the Dustin Inman Society, was added to the hate map in 2018, years after the SPLC said that his group was not a hate group. So he had a rock solid defamation case, and that case has made it past the motion to dismiss. So right now, there is a live case on the hate map that the SPLC is facing.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean it's monumental news. It happened last year, and I don't think it's gotten the coverage that it deserves. But that one is in progression, and we will see where that goes. If the SPLC loses that case, I think they might be forced to change the way that they handle things. But that is live. So the answer to your question is we're not there yet. It's possible we could get there. And, I think we should. I think what the SPLC has done is defamation, but, you have to work hard to prove that case. And
Hmm.
right now the courts are considering that.
Interesting. All right. Well, Tyler, is there anything else you want to share with the audience before we go? And by the way, thank you again for your time. It's been very insightful, and I hope that everyone goes and reads your works if they want to know more about the SPLC.
Thank you. No, I think the only thing I'd add is um, one of the groups that the SPLC is branded a hate group is called the Ruth Institute. They're a small nonprofit in Louisiana founded by a Roman Catholic who's very faithful. She made the mistake. One of the reasons they're marked as a hate group is because she said on radio, she quoted the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is the authoritative statement of Catholic doctrine for the 1 billion Catholics across the world. And that statement, the SPLC said, because you quoted that statement, you are a hate group. And so, according to the SPLC's logic, the entire Roman Catholic Church should be considered a hate group. And that, I think, is one of the most damning pieces of evidence against the SPLC. And until I've reached out to them multiple times asking them to comment on this, they still keep that quote as damning evidence of her hate on their website. And they have yet to address the fact that this is how far they are. So I think, I'm going to continue to ask them that. I've asked President Biden, the Biden administration has relied on the SPLC for determining hate. And the SPLC has provided briefings to numerous federal agencies, including the DOJ, the FBI, the Department of Education. The FBI notoriously had that memo attacking radical traditional Catholics that cited the Southern Poverty Law Center. So I think it's very important that people know that this group is not reliable. But
No,
thank you again so much for having me on.
no problem. Thank you so much. And everyone else, have a nice day. Bye bye.